The Texas plains stretched endlessly under a merciless August sun, waves of heat rising from the parched earth like ghostly dancers. Jake Morrison rode his bay gelding at a steady pace, his weathered hat pulled low against the glare. The silence was absolute except for the rhythmic thud of hoofbeats and the creak of leather, a silence that had earned him his nickname among the few who knew him. Silent Jake never wasted words, and out here in the vastness words seemed as scarce and precious as water. He'd been riding for 3 days, following rumors of work at a ranch near Cedar Ridge. At 34, Jake had spent half his life drifting from job to job, never staying long enough to put down roots or make enemies. His face bore the permanent squint lines of a man who lived under open sky, and his hands, wrapped around the reins, were scarred from years of handling rope, cattle, and the occasional disagreement settled with fists. The vultures circling ahead caught his attention first. Jake's pale blue eyes tracked their lazy spirals against the cloudless sky, and his jaw tightened. Vultures meant death, and death on the plains usually meant trouble for the living. He urged his horse forward, one hand instinctively checking the Colt 45 at his hip. What he found made him rein up hard. The remains of a small Comanche camp lay scattered across a depression in the prairie, torn lodge covers flapping in the hot wind, scattered belongings, and dark stains in the dust that told of violence. Jake dismounted slowly, his boots crunching on broken pottery. This wasn't the work of soldiers. The destruction was too hasty, too incomplete. Rival tribe, maybe, or raiders looking for horses and scalps. The crying reached him as he picked through the debris, weak, intermittent, almost lost in the wind. Jake froze, listening. There it was again, the unmistakable sound of an infant in distress. He followed the sound to a collapsed travois partially hidden beneath a buffalo hide. Pushing aside the heavy cover, he found a cradle board wedged beneath the wooden frame. Inside, a Comanche baby no more than 6 months old lay wrapped in soft deerskin, his dark eyes wide with exhaustion and fear. The child's lips were cracked from thirst, but he was alive, somehow, miraculously alive, in this place of death. Jake stared down at the infant, his mind racing. Every instinct told him to mount up and ride away. Taking a Comanche baby was asking for a world of trouble. The tribes were fierce about their children, and white men who interfered rarely lived to regret it. But those dark eyes looking up at him, the way the tiny fist grasped weakly at the air. Jake had seen death in many forms, but he couldn't walk away from life when he had the power to preserve it. "Well, little one," he murmured, his voice hoarse from disuse. "Looks like you and me got ourselves a situation." He lifted the cradle board carefully, surprised by how light it was. The baby whimpered but didn't cry, too weak maybe, or too young to understand the full scope of his abandonment. Jake secured the cradle board to his saddle, then took one last look around the destroyed camp. Whoever had done this was long gone, but the Comanche who'd survived would be back. They always came back for their dead, and they'd be looking for their missing. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon as Jake remounted. Cedar Ridge was still a day's hard ride east, but he knew of a waterhole about 10 miles north where he could tend to the baby's immediate needs. As he turned his horse away from the camp, a movement caught his eye. On a ridge perhaps half a mile distant, a lone figure sat motionless on horseback watching. Even at that distance, Jake could make out the distinctive silhouette of a Comanche warrior, the feathers in his hair catching the afternoon light, the way he sat his horse like he was born to it. For a long moment, the two men regarded each other across the empty plain. Then the warrior was gone, vanished as if he'd never been there at all. Jake's mouth went dry. He'd been seen, and that changed everything. Word would spread quickly through the scattered bands that a white man rode with one of their children. The baby stirred against his chest, making soft sounds that tugged at something deep in Jake's weathered heart. "Reckon we best move fast, little partner," he whispered, spurring his horse into a ground-eating lope. "Dawn's coming, and I got a feeling it's bringing company we ain't gonna want to meet." Behind them, the vultures continued their patient circles, and the wind sang a lonesome song through the ruins of what had once been home to the child, now riding toward an uncertain future in the arms of a silent cowboy who'd just changed both their destinies forever. The waterhole appeared as a dark smudge against the golden grass, just as the sun kissed the horizon. Jake's horse, sensing water, quickened its pace toward the small spring that bubbled up from limestone rocks to form a clear pool no bigger than a man could span with outstretched arms. Cottonwoods clustered around the precious water, their leaves whispering secrets in the evening breeze. Jake dismounted carefully, mindful of the infant secured against his chest. The baby had grown increasingly restless during the ride, his weak cries becoming more frequent as thirst and hunger took their toll. Jake had never tended a child before, but common sense told him the little one needed water and milk, neither of which he possessed in the right form. "Easy there, partner," Jake murmured, settling cross-legged beside the spring. He dipped his bandana in the cool water and gently moistened the baby's cracked lips. The infant's tongue darted out eagerly, and Jake repeated the process, letting tiny drops fall into the waiting mouth. As he worked, Jake's mind churned with the enormity of his situation. Cedar Ridge was still a day's ride, but even reaching the settlement wouldn't solve his problems. The town barely tolerated friendly Indians who came to trade. They sure wouldn't welcome a white man harboring a Comanche baby. And somewhere behind him, that lone warrior was probably gathering his band, following a trail that led straight to this waterhole. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made Jake's hand drop to his colt, but he relaxed slightly when he recognized the distinctive gait of a mule. From the gathering dusk emerged an unexpected sight. A grizzled Mexican man leading a pack mule laden with supplies, his ancient sombrero shadowing a face creased by 60 years of desert sun. "Buenas tardes," the stranger called, raising one weathered hand in greeting. "I am Esteban Morales. This water, she belongs to no man. See?" Jake nodded slowly, still cradling the baby. "Jake Morrison. Water's free to all, far as I know." Esteban's sharp black eyes took in the scene, the cradleboard, the infant, Jake's obvious discomfort with his tiny charge. The old man's eyebrows rose, but he asked no questions as he led his mule to drink. Instead, he began unpacking his supplies with practiced efficiency. "A baby, he needs leche," Esteban observed casually, producing a small pot and a leather pouch. "Goat's milk. She is better than cow's milk for the little ones. My Rosa, she had 7 children. I know these things." Relief flooded through Jake. "You got goat's milk? Powdered. See? From the trading post in San Antonio. Mix with water, warm by the fire." Esteban was already gathering dry wood with the confidence of a man who'd made countless camps. "This Niño, he is not yours, I think." It wasn't a question, and Jake saw no point in lying. "Found him, his people, there was trouble." Esteban nodded gravely as he struck flint to tinder. "Much trouble these days. The Apache, the Comanche, the Texanos, everyone fighting for the same piece of earth." He glanced at the baby, who had quieted in Jake's arms. "But children, they do not choose their parents or their tribe. They only choose to live or to die." As darkness settled over the plains, the small fire cast dancing shadows on their weathered faces. Esteban mixed the powdered milk with warm water, testing the temperature on his wrist with the care of an experienced father. Jake watched, fascinated despite himself, as the old man demonstrated how to feed the infant with patience and gentle persistence. "Like this, see? Small amounts let him rest, then more. He has been hungry for some time, this one." The baby took to the milk eagerly, his small hands grasping at the makeshift feeding cloth Esteban had fashioned. Color returned to the infant's cheeks, and his dark eyes grew brighter. For the first time since Jake had found him, the child seemed truly alive rather than merely surviving. "He's got fight in him," Jake observed, surprised by the pride in his own voice. "All Comanche have fight," Esteban replied matter-of-factly. "Is in their blood, like the need for horses and open sky. But this one, he will need more than fight. He will need someone to teach him about 2 worlds, the one he was born to and the one he must live in now." Jake felt the weight of those words. "I ain't no teacher. I'm just a drifter looking for work. See? Then why did you not leave him for the buzzards?" The question hung in the firelit air like smoke. Jake had no good answer, or maybe he had too many answers he wasn't ready to voice. He looked down at the baby, now sleeping peacefully in his arms, tiny fingers curled trustingly around Jake's thumb. "Dawn comes early on the plains," Esteban said quietly, banking the fire. "And sometimes it brings visitors we do not expect. I have traveled these lands for many years, amigo. I know the signs." Jake's hand tightened on his rifle. "You saw something?" 3 riders, maybe 4, following your trail, moving careful-like, staying to the high ground. They will reach this place when the sun shows her face." Esteban's weathered face was grave in the firelight. "Comanche warriors do not give up their children easily. Then maybe I should ride on. No point dragging you into this mess." Esteban chuckled, a dry sound like wind through dead leaves. "Too late for that, compadre. I have shared your fire and helped feed their child. In their eyes, I am already part of this story." He settled back against his saddle, apparently unconcerned. "Besides, I am curious to see how this tale ends. It has been many years since I witnessed something that might change the way men think about each other. Jake stared across the fire at the old Mexican, wondering if Esteban was brave, foolish, or simply too old to care about the difference. The baby stirred in his arms, making soft sounds of contentment that seemed impossibly loud in the vast silence of the plains. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote howled, long, mournful, and wild. Jake found himself listening for hoofbeats that might echo the sound, knowing that dawn would bring answers to questions he wasn't sure he was ready to ask. The first gray light of dawn crept across the Texas plains like spilled water, revealing a world washed clean by the cool night air. Jake had slept fitfully, the baby warm against his chest, one ear always tuned to the sounds of the prairie. Esteban, despite his age, had taken the last watch, sitting motionless as a carved saint with his old Spencer rifle across his knees. "They come," the Mexican whispered, his voice barely audible above the morning breeze. Jake's eyes snapped open fully, his hand instinctively moving to his Colt. In the growing light he could see them, 4 riders emerging from a shallow draw about 200 yards out, their horses moving at a deliberate walk. Even at this distance, there was no mistaking the fluid way they sat their mounts, the eagle feathers catching the first rays of sunlight, the painted war shields slung across their backs. The baby stirred in Jake's arms, sensing the tension, but didn't cry. Smart little fellow, Jake thought grimly, knows when to stay quiet. "The one in front," Esteban murmured, "he wears the war bonnet of a chief. The others, they are young warriors, eager to prove themselves. This could go very bad, very quickly." Jake studied the approaching riders. The leader was a man of perhaps 40 winters, his face painted with black and yellow stripes, his war bonnet flowing down his back like a river of feathers. The way he held himself spoke of authority, earned through countless battles. This was no hot-headed young buck. This was a leader who'd survived by being smart as well as fierce. "What's the play here?" Jake asked quietly, his throat dry as sand. "La verdad," Esteban replied simply. "The truth. Sometimes it is the only weapon that works." The Comanche riders stopped just beyond rifle range, their horses snorting and pawing the ground. For long moments, nobody moved. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring, broken only by the whisper of wind through grass and the distant cry of a red-tailed hawk. Then the war chief raised his right hand, palm forward, the universal sign for parley. Jake felt some of the tension leave his shoulders, though his hand remained ready near his weapon. "He wants to talk," Jake observed. "Sigh, but talking and understanding, they are not always the same thing," Esteban warned. Slowly, deliberately, Jake stood up, cradling the baby carefully in his arms. He walked forward until he stood at the edge of the firelight's reach, close enough for words but far enough to draw iron if things went wrong. The war chief urged his horse forward, stopping perhaps 20 feet away. Up close, Jake could see the intelligence in the man's dark eyes, the way he took in every detail, the baby's condition, Jake's posture, Esteban's position by the fire. This was a man who missed nothing and forgot less. "I am Standing Bear of the Antelope Band," the chief said in heavily accented but clear English. "You have something that belongs to my people." Jake's jaw tightened. "Found him in the ruins of a camp. Everybody else was dead or gone. Figured leaving him for the buzzards wasn't much of a choice." Standing Bear's eyes never left the baby. "My sister's son. His name is Little Hawk." The grief that flickered across the chief's weathered features was quickly suppressed. "The Kiowa came in the night like cowards, killed many, scattered the rest. When we returned to gather our dead, the child was gone." "I ain't looking for trouble," Jake said carefully, "but I couldn't leave him to die. And now you will give him back." It wasn't a question, but Jake heard the slight uncertainty beneath the words. Standing Bear was a war chief, accustomed to taking what he wanted by force, but something in this situation gave him pause. Maybe it was the fact that Jake had obviously cared for the child, or maybe it was the way the baby had grown calm in Jake's arms, as if sensing safety. "That's his choice to make," Jake said quietly. Standing Bear's eyebrows rose slightly. "You speak strangely for a white man. Children do not choose their families." "Sometimes they do." Jake looked down at the baby, who was watching the exchange with alert, dark eyes. "Sometimes life chooses for them." One of the young warriors behind Standing Bear said something sharp in Comanche, his hand moving restlessly on his lance. The chief replied curtly, never taking his eyes off Jake. "White Elk says we should take the child and leave your bones for the coyotes," Standing Bear translated. He does not understand why we talk instead of fight. Reckon that's between you and him, Jake replied evenly. But this little one's been through enough violence, seems ashamed to add more. Esteban rose from beside the fire, moving slowly to avoid alarming the warriors. In his hands, he carried something that made Standing Bear's eyes widen, a beautifully crafted Comanche cradleboard, decorated with intricate beadwork and sacred symbols. This belonged to the child's mother, Esteban said quietly. I found it in the ruins when I passed through yesterday. Thought it might be important to someone. Standing Bear dismounted in one fluid motion, his moccasined feet silent on the prairie grass. He approached the cradleboard with reverence, his fingers tracing the familiar patterns. Yellowbird's work, he whispered. My sister. She made this when she learned she carried a son. His voice grew heavy with loss. She died, bringing him into this world. Now the Kiowa have taken her husband as well. The moment stretched between them, charged with grief and possibility. Jake found himself stepping forward, closing the distance between two worlds. He's been fed and cared for, Jake said softly. Got some fight in him, this one. Going to grow up strong. Standing Bear looked up from the cradleboard, his eyes meeting Jake's directly. You could have left him. Would have been easier for you. Easier ain't always right. For the first time, Standing Bear's stern expression softened slightly. You speak truth, white man. But now what? The child belongs with his people, but his people are scattered. The soldiers push us toward the reservation, the Kiowa raid our camps, and winter comes soon. What life can we offer Little Hawk now? It was a question that hung in the dawn air like smoke, heavy with implications neither man was ready to voice. Behind them, the other warriors shifted restlessly, confused by their chief's hesitation. The baby made a small sound, reaching out with tiny fingers toward the cradleboard that had been his first home. Jake felt the weight of the decisions settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. Whatever happened next would change all their lives forever, and the morning sun was climbing higher, burning away the shadows where compromise might hide. The sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the prairie as the standoff continued. Jake could feel sweat beading beneath his hat brim, though whether from the heat or tension, he couldn't say. The baby, Little Hawk, had grown fussy, sensing the emotional undercurrents swirling around him like invisible storm winds. Standing Bear held his sister's cradleboard with reverence, his weathered fingers tracing the intricate beadwork that told the story of a child's hopes and dreams. Behind him, the three younger warriors grew increasingly agitated. White Elk, the most vocal of the group, spoke again in rapid Comanche, his voice rising with frustration. He says we waste time with talk, Standing Bear translated, his own voice heavy with the burden of leadership. Says the white man seeks to steal our children as he has stolen our land. And what do you say? Jake asked quietly, adjusting his hold on Little Hawk. Standing Bear was quiet for a long moment, studying Jake's face with the intensity of a man reading tracks in difficult country. I say you could have ridden away yesterday when you saw me watching, could have left the child at the first settlement and continued on your path, but you did not. Esteban stepped forward, his ancient face creased with concern. Perhaps there is another way to think about this, Jefes. The Niño, he needs family, see? But family is not always about blood alone. Sometimes it is about who is willing to sacrifice for the child's good. White Elk's hand tightened on his lance, and he barked something harsh in Comanche. Standing Bear's reply was sharp and final, causing the younger warrior to fall silent, though his eyes continued to burn with anger. What's he so fired up about? Jake asked. His brother died in the Kiowa raid, Standing Bear explained. White Elk sees enemies everywhere now, and perhaps he is not wrong. But anger makes poor decisions. The chief looked down at Little Hawk, who had begun to fuss more insistently. The child grows hungry again. Without hesitation, Esteban moved to prepare another feeding, his movements calm and practiced, despite the tension crackling in the morning air. As he worked, he spoke quietly to Standing Bear in fluent Spanish, the two older men engaging in a conversation that Jake could only partially follow. Jake caught fragments, words about children, family, safety, and the uncertain future that awaited all of them. Standing Bear nodded occasionally, his expression thoughtful. Whatever Esteban was saying seemed to be having an effect on the war chief. The old one speaks wisdom, Standing Bear finally said to Jake. He reminds me that the white man's world and the Comanche world are like two rivers flowing toward the same sea. Sometimes they run side by side, sometimes they clash and fight, but always they are moving toward the same ending. What ending is that? Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew. Change. The buffalo grow fewer each year. The soldiers grow more numerous. Our children must learn to live in a world that will not be the same as the one that shaped their fathers. Standing Bear's voice carried the weight of prophecy and loss. Perhaps Little Hawk's path was always meant to be different. White Elk spoke again, his voice tight with emotion. This time Standing Bear's reply was longer, more patient, the tone of a teacher rather than a commander. The young warrior's posture gradually relaxed, though his eyes remained hard. I told him about my vision quest, Standing Bear explained to Jake. 3 winters ago, I sought guidance from the spirits about our people's future. In the vision, I saw Comanche children who learned the ways of both worlds, who could ride like the wind and speak the white man's tongue, who honored their ancestors while walking new paths. Little Hawk had quieted in Jake's arms. One tiny fist wrapped around Jake's finger with surprising strength. The simple gesture seemed to anchor something in Jake's chest, a feeling he'd never experienced before, but recognized instinctively as belonging. "What are you proposing?" Jake asked, though his heart was already racing ahead to possibilities he hadn't dared consider. Standing Bear looked at his sister's child, then at Jake, then at the vast expanse of prairie that stretched beyond the horizon. "Winter comes soon. My band moves toward the reservation, though our hearts fight against it. Little Hawk would be safe there, fed and sheltered, but—" He paused, searching for words. "An eagle raised in a cage may live, but it never learns to soar." Esteban approached with the prepared milk, but instead of taking the baby, he handed the feeding cloth to Standing Bear. "A child should know the hands of his blood family," the old Mexican said gently. Standing Bear accepted the feeding with obvious emotion, his strong hands surprisingly gentle as he coaxed Little Hawk to take nourishment. For several minutes, the only sounds were the baby's contented suckling and the whisper of wind through grass. "There is a trading post 2 days' ride south," Standing Bear said finally. "Manuel Sandoval runs it, a fair man who treats with both Comanche and Texano. His wife tends children whose parents cannot care for them. Little Hawk could stay there, learn both languages, both ways of thinking." Jake felt his chest tighten. After less than 2 days, the thought of giving up the baby felt like tearing away part of himself. "That what you want for him? What I want and what is best may not be the same thing," Standing Bear replied, his voice heavy with the wisdom of hard choices. "But perhaps there is another way. You speak of the child choosing his family. What if his family chose to expand?" The implications of those words hung in the morning air like heat shimmer. Jake looked from Standing Bear to Little Hawk, then to the 3 younger warriors who watched every movement with hawk-like intensity. "You're talking about something that ain't been done before," Jake said slowly. "Many things that ain't been done before are happening these days," Standing Bear replied, using Jake's own words back at him. "The question is whether we are brave enough to try something new, or whether we let old hatreds choose for us." Esteban cleared his throat softly. "The sun grows hot, and decisions made in haste are often regretted at leisure. Perhaps the jefes should consider what is truly best for the niño, not what is easiest for the men." Little Hawk had finished feeding, and now lay peaceful in his uncle's arms, dark eyes gazing up with the trust that only the very young can show. In that moment, Jake saw not a Comanche baby or a white man's burden, but simply a child who deserved the best chance at life that the adults around him could provide. The weight of that responsibility settled on all of them, like dust after a long ride, and Jake realized that whatever decision they made would echo through generations yet unborn. The morning sun had climbed to its full strength when Standing Bear made his decision. He rose from where he'd been feeding Little Hawk, the child now content and drowsy in his arms. The war chief's weathered face showed the strain of wrestling with choices that would reshape not just one life, but the understanding between 2 peoples. "There is wisdom in what the Old One says," Standing Bear announced, nodding toward Esteban. "The child's welfare must come first." He looked directly at Jake, his dark eyes holding depths of meaning. "But wisdom also tells me that Little Hawk's path was changed the moment you chose to save him instead of riding away." White Elk spoke sharply, his voice carrying the edge of challenge. The other 2 warriors shifted restlessly, hands moving to their weapons. Standing Bear's reply was firm, but not angry, the tone of a leader explaining rather than commanding. "What's the trouble?" Jake asked, though he could read the tension in their postures. "White Elk says I dishonor our ancestors by considering such a thing. He says the child should come with us, be raised in the old ways, even if those ways lead to the reservation." Standing Bear's voice carried the weight of old sorrows. "But I have seen the reservation. I have seen proud warriors reduced to begging for government beef, children who forget their fathers' names because they are forbidden to speak them. Jake felt the baby's tiny fist close around his finger again, that simple gesture somehow more binding than any oath. "What are you proposing exactly?" "A thing that has never been done," Standing Bear said slowly. "You would raise Little Hawk as your son, teach him the white man's ways, but—" He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "But he would also know his Comanche name, his mother's people, the stories of his blood. When the seasons change, when it is safe, he would visit his uncle's fire and learn the ways of his fathers." The proposition hung in the air like morning mist, fragile and revolutionary. Esteban nodded slowly, his ancient eyes bright with approval. "It could work," he said quietly. "The boy could learn to walk between worlds, to speak the language of both peoples. Perhaps he could even help others learn to understand each other." White Elk's protest was immediate and furious, but Standing Bear cut him off with a sharp gesture. The exchange that followed was heated but brief, ending with the young warrior falling silent, though his jaw remained set in stubborn lines. "He thinks I am a fool," Standing Bear said with a slight smile. "Perhaps he is right, but sometimes foolishness and courage look very much the same." Jake looked down at Little Hawk, who had fallen asleep in the safety of his uncle's arms. The child's face was peaceful, unmarked by the prejudices and fears that divided the adult world. The boy would need to know the truth about his parents, about what happened to them. When he is old enough to understand, yes, truth is like the wind. It finds its way into everything eventually. Better to speak it clearly than let it whisper lies. Standing Bear's voice grew heavy with memory. His father was a good man, brave in battle but gentle with children. His mother, she had healing hands and a laugh like water over stones. Little Hawk should know he comes from strong people. Esteban stepped forward, his weathered hands empty but his eyes full of purpose. "This thing you speak of, it will not be easy. There will be those among both peoples who will not understand. The white towns will whisper about the Indian child, and some of your own people will say the boy is lost to them. The hardest paths often lead to the most beautiful destinations," Standing Bear replied. "And perhaps Little Hawk will not be the only one to walk between worlds. Perhaps he will teach others that such walking is possible." Jake felt the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders like a heavy coat. He thought of his own rootless life, the endless drifting from job to job, the silence that had been his only companion for so many years. The idea of staying in one place, of raising a child, of building something lasting, it terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. "I ain't got much to offer," he said finally. "No land, no steady work, no wife to help with the raising. You have something more valuable," Standing Bear said, carefully transferring the sleeping child back to Jake's arms. "You have a heart that chooses life over death, hope over fear. That is the foundation on which all good things are built." As Little Hawk settled against Jake's chest, the baby's tiny hand once again finding his finger, Jake felt something shift inside him, a door opening to possibilities he'd never imagined. "What about the law? There's going to be questions, official types wanting to know where he came from." Esteban chuckled, the sound dry as desert wind. "Ah, the law. In this country, there is the law that is written in books, and the law that is written in men's hearts. The heart law says a man protects what is innocent and vulnerable. The book law," he shrugged eloquently, "the book law can be very slow to catch up to the heart law." Standing Bear nodded gravely. "There is wisdom in taking the child far from here, at least for a time. Let him grow strong and sure of himself, before the world tries to tell him what he cannot be." "California," Jake said suddenly, the word surprising him as it left his lips. "Got a cousin out there, runs cattle in the San Joaquin Valley. Says there's always work for a man who knows horses and ain't afraid of hard labor." "And the people there?" Standing Bear asked. "Mixed bunch. Spanish, Mexican, white, Indian, all kinds trying to make a living together. Might be Little Hawk could grow up there without standing out so much." Standing Bear considered this, then nodded slowly. "It is good. Let him learn that the world is bigger than the hatred between Comanche and Texan." He reached into his leather pouch and withdrew something that glinted in the sunlight, a small silver medallion on a braided cord. This was his mother's. She wore it when she married his father. "When Little Hawk is old enough, tell him it represents the love that brought him into this world." Jake accepted the medallion with reverence, understanding that he was being entrusted with more than just a piece of jewelry. "I'll tell him, and I'll tell him about his uncle who was brave enough to let him go." The farewell was awkward, as such moments always are when lives diverge after brief but meaningful intersection. Standing Bear spoke to Little Hawk in Comanche, words that sounded like a blessing or a promise. White Elk remained stony-faced, but offered a grudging nod of acknowledgement to Jake's courage. As the Comanche warriors prepared to depart, Standing Bear turned back one final time. The child's Comanche name is Soaring Hawk Who Sees Far. Perhaps one day he will truly soar between our worlds and see farther than any of us. Jake watched the four riders disappear into the heat shimmer of the prairie, taking with them the last connection to Little Hawk's blood family. In his arms, the baby stirred and opened dark eyes that seemed to hold depths of understanding far beyond his months. "Well, son," Jake said softly, his voice no longer quite so rusty from disuse, "looks like we got ourselves a long trail ahead, but I reckon we'll figure it out as we go." Esteban began packing his supplies, but his movements were unhurried. "You know, compadre," he said thoughtfully, "I have been thinking about California myself. An old man gets tired of traveling alone, and this niño, he will need someone to teach him Spanish, no?" Jake looked at the grizzled Mexican, seeing the loneliness that mirrored his own, the desire to be part of something larger than solitary existence. "Reckon California's got room for all kinds of dreamers." As they prepared to leave the waterhole that had become a crossroads of destiny, Jake felt the weight of responsibility, settling not as a burden, but as a purpose. The silent cowboy, who had ridden alone for so many years, was silent no more. He had a son to talk to, a future to build, and a story to tell that would span two worlds and the vast, hopeful country that lay between them. The prairie stretched endlessly ahead, no longer empty but full of possibility, carrying three travelers toward a horizon bright with promise and the chance for understanding between peoples who had been enemies too long. In Jake's arms, Little Hawk, Soaring Hawk Who Sees Far, slept peacefully, unaware that he carried within himself the seeds of a bridge between worlds, nurtured by love that transcended the boundaries of blood and tribe.